Hello everyone, welcome to the garage. I'm Fast Rod, and in today's video, it will be the first of three videos on the styling history of the uh, different automakers from the U.S. Chrysler, obviously being the premise of this video. Uh, Nextly will probably be either Ford or General Motors. I cannot commit to a specific time or date of that release just because research can be confusing, as I've learned with this video. It can be confusing. It can be extensive. It's gonna be a while, but get that out as soon as I can. So today's topic is going to be, like I mentioned earlier, the styling history of Chrysler, the Chrysler Corporation, um, and a lot of what goes on. I do happen to have some names for particularly styled vehicles. Um, Outside of that, I got a lot of names of individuals behind the scenes, taking care of this kind of stuff. And as far as I've been able to research, at least for Chrysler, they didn't have a president or specific person assigned. Hey, you are completely in charge of designs for all brands, or you're in charge of the teams of all the different brands. It seems that it was tied into the vice presidency of the corporation, um, as far as I can tell. Um, So that is the approach. At one point, it becomes a committee. Uh, it will kind of cross a lot of that information when we get there. Um, but to kick things off, um, it starts actually with World War II. Uh, it may or may not be known. You can definitely find it out there. But uh, during the war effort, uh, in 1943, 44, and 45, uh, no new vehicles were allowed to be designed. A lot of the auto manufacturer factories were actually to be repurposed and uh, refocused to building tanks, planes, um, military aircrafts, watercrafts. Of course, that being more of the shipping and docking stations. But a lot of the factories were focused and refocused, repurposed for the war effort. Cars were allowed to be made, but everything was a 1942 design, and even at that, it was a limited. No frills, no nice wheels, no this, no that, no nice, pretty, shiny, chromy details. None of that. It really was just a military use vehicle, and a lot of the vehicles of those, I mean, the small amount of vehicles that were supplied by the auto manufacturers and were allowed to be produced were for military purposes. Um, that's what it was. You could have a 1943, you could have a 1944 or 45, but it would likely be a military vehicle transporting either troops, spies, stuff like that, undercover agents, um, military staff, uh, generals, whatnot. So with that said, 1946 is actually the first year after the war when auto manufacturers were kind of eased off the war effort, obviously with the war being over in 45, and they were allowed to produce new vehicles. And given that at minimum most vehicles out on the road were 3 years old at this point, people were quite itchy to purchase new vehicles, and Car designers, as far as I have it understood, they weren't necessarily a thing, at least, not yet. Um, they were still very much being built, as I've come across, by engineers. Engineers were really, hacking in the technology that they could discover, they could create, and they could be supplied in a timely manner to, the factories. Um, but in 1948, we get a thing called envelope styling. Envelope styling was obviously, um, as you could probably tell from the picture, a styling that the fenders were no longer bolted on to a core uh, body. They were finally integrated with the side panels and with the hood. Um, it was no longer the car being very segmented pieces that you could just unbolt and replace in case of a fender bender or in case you got T-boned or something. Uh, Finally, they were starting to slowly become one piece units. You know, and it just I'm not gonna go into too much detail because this would be a very long video otherwise, but I'll try to give some of the more overarching things. And like I said, 48, 48 was the last year for the pre-envelope styling. 1949 was actually the first year of the envelope styling where the fenders and the side of the car actually went all the way out to pretty much tuck the tires within the body. And they were one piece unit. It was all one smooth transition into the hood. It was not, there weren't two pieces. There wasn't any of that kind of stuff. And 1949 was when that began. Um, let's see. And, uh, ah, okay. So that actually remained, the envelope styling remained until 1955. 1955, 54. 1955, a new gentleman by the name of Virgil Exner that I've mentioned before was hired at Chrysler. Or he was at least ascended to being the vice president, which once again plays into the whole research thing that I've done. Uh, where, as far as I have it understood, between you know 1946 to, well, actually really 1948 to 1973, maybe 1975, somewhere about there. Um, the vice president of Chrysler Corporation um, was the top person to consult about designs. Obviously, the president likely had to approve everything, but in terms of like stylists and designers going to a specific someone for cues, for details, and for just overall design uh, questions or concerns, it seems like the vice president of the corporation was the top dog to speak about that. With all that said, as I said, 1948 to 1940, 54, I'm sorry, a gentleman named K.T. Keller kind of seemed to have ran things. And a model that he established in that time period was that our cars won't knock the eyes out of your head, are but they won't knock the hat off your head as well. Um, it's a bit janky to say. There are more streamlined ways of saying that, but the design element of most of the Chrysler products, most Chrysler, Dodge, DeSoto, because that was another brand. May have not mentioned that before, but uh, it was another brand under the Chrysler umbrella. Unfortunately, it was killed off in the 60s, if this, my information is correct. In the early 60s, it was killed off. But what he meant by that was that the cabin, um, particularly the roof of the cabin, is sometimes referred to as the greenhouse. Um, Cars from Chrysler from 1948 when the envelope styling began to 1954 when it uh, slowly began to end. It really extends to 1956 because 1957 is when the next styling, cycle per se really began. Uh, but the like I said, the roof is sometimes called greenhouse, um, and the greenhouse on a lot of the vehicles from that time period, from the envelope style period, um, you know, had a really tall roof line. And once again, that plays into to the motto that the gentleman had about, hats. Well, what he meant was the styling wasn't going to, per se, in modern terms, blast you away or really give you that wowness, but it was going to at least allow you to maintain uh, formal wear. So if you were a gentleman who was dressed with a hat, uh, any kind of, Tribly top hat, anything like that, the cars from Chrysler wouldn't require you to remove that. Something that the competition did have. The 1950s, late 1940s, and into the early 1950s. If you look at the General Motors or Ford, you can very much tell that the roof lines were rather short. Um, and they, obviously going into the sleeker design and stuff like that. Um, they obviously, you know, did require someone in formal dress wear to, well, perhaps remove their hat. And, that's also been seen in cinema, especially if you go back and look at films of that time period. Yeah, if they're usually driving a Ford or a General Motors product, usually the gentleman will remove their hat, detective, anything like that. They'll take their hat off and they'll climb into the vehicle. Well, once again, K.T. Keller, who was in charge of all that kind of stuff, didn't like that. He didn't like that. He didn't appreciate that, and he had this natural assumption that perhaps the general audience would appreciate a vehicle with a tall greenhouse in which you didn't have to remove your headwear, hats, caps, anything like that. Um, Unfortunately, by 1956, that kind of styling was seen as outdated. Kind of made the cars a bit goofy, and unfortunate because of that, um, he obviously retired and was replaced by Virgil Exner. Virgil Exner, obviously seeing the issues, seeing the different things, he had already been 2 years into a position where he could influence the design of cars, and he slowly began to introduce the fin design. Well, in 1957, he was kind of given his big break, and he was really allowed to, have at it, and that he did. Virgil Exner really went after it, and he created, obviously, the forward look that I've mentioned in other videos. And due to that, well, we get cars like, the 1961, 62 um, Valiant, the Imperial. One correction that I've seen several times over is that some people will call them Chrysler Imperials. That's not quite right. Chrysler Imperials were sold by Chrysler, but they were not a Chrysler brand product. Apparently, Imperial was under Chrysler, but it was treated almost as its own brand, which is quite interesting. But yeah, Imperials, Dodge, Dodge, Plymouth, Valiants, all those kind of vehicles. That's where you get that really angular look, that really, tall fins and stuff like that. Um, and for 1957, as far as I have it understood, it really was a bit of a shell shock in the automotive industry and really took the industry by storm because lots of chrome, tall angular designs, fins, front, just it's there, and it's definitely something that is present in the Fallout universe. Um, with the Fallout vehicles, seems that that styling cycle either came back around or may have been reintroduced, or as a good majority of the fan base has taken it, it never died. Um, whatever the case may be, definitely is present, and it was definitely a thing in our universe by the Chrysler Corporation. However, and unfortunately, Virgil Axner's stint at Chrysler in his position where he could make these kinds of calls was not very long. In 1963, he was replaced. That happened, as far as I've been able to, find out. That happened because a rumor that General Motors was going to be downsizing their cars reached the ears of the presidency or the leadership at Chrysler Corporation. Thus, they insisted that Virgil take his designs, not his designs, but at least the designs on his desk, and a lot of, the work that he was helping the stylist and everything kind of put together, to shrink it, downsize it, make it into a smaller platform, and we'll make it happen. When, that news broke out that, hey, they were going to downsize vehicles and stuff like that, turns out that was nothing more than a rumor. And that did not bode well. They ended up needing someone to blame, and so therefore they kind of pinned it on him, and yeah, out was, he was out. Obviously they didn't want to completely let him, be offed, um, just because they kind of knew what they did with him. They gave him a way to maintain ties to the corporation until he actually reached retirement. After that, we have uh, a gentleman named Elwood Angle. Elwood Angle would be the person responsible for the slab side look, which apparently is a thing. The fuselage styling, which was actually uh, part of his final few years at his stint there at Chrysler, and uh, also the Coke bottle design. That is that was actually introduced by the um, Ford Mustang, of all things. That was initially introduced. It's a bit, far more square, but definitely vehicles in Chrysler, as of 1968, going into the 1970s, definitely popularized it and really, really sensationalized the styling of the Coke bottle design. Um, with vehicles like the Dodge Charger, um, the uh, Satellite, the Super Bee, um, the GTX, the Roadrunner, and then of course, famously the Challenger, the Barracuda. Um, and well into the 70s, it happened. Well into the 70s, those vehicles maintained that design. Um, and he, his contributions to, uh, to designs of Chrysler are quite extensive. Um, from there, I only managed to dig out a name, which is why I said it leads into the early to mid 70s. Apparently, that gentleman was he retired in 73 and was replaced by a gentleman named Dick McAdam. Uh, this is where I run into an issue. The trail goes cold for me until around 74, 75, somewhere about there. Um, that is because, unfortunately, due to management and leadership and even company structure issues that were brought about due to the 1973 oil crisis at Chrysler, um, the trail goes cold because I, for the life of me, have not been really able to find any information on Dick McAdam. Um, from what I've read and from what I've gathered, um, the position for vice president of the corporation was actually repurposed into a committee of several individuals, um, just because none of them had any leadership or any high-ranking experience. That's as much as I've gathered. Uh, and unfortunately, I can only presume that that remained until 1985. 1985 is when I pick up the trail again with a gentleman named Tom Gale being either being named president of styling or I believe it was vice president. Hello, everyone. Editor Fastrod here. And I realized that after the segment that you just heard, I did not talk about the automotive styling of Chrysler Corporation at all. Just to briefly sum it up, um, the actual styling of the 19 mid to late 1970s was obviously it started out as a Coke bottle styling in the early 70s, and by around the time that Dick McAdam takes over for Elwood Angle, it seems that he really tried to kind of take that styling and kind of push it into the future, but because of everything that I just talked about, it seems that that sort of styling, along with the fact that sales began to slump for Chrysler Corporation due to the 1973 oil crisis, um, it would appear that cars just kind of began to be squared once again, going back to the idea that there wasn't any one person in charge. It seemed to be a committee, so everyone was kind of trying their own thing, just kind of trying to as minimize spending, and due to that, it seems like they kind of just would come up with one single design, or designers, were very limited on what they could do to try to cut costs as much as possible and try their best to avoid any kind of, financial disruption or any major financial spending that could really hurt the corporation. Um, Due to that, um, likely cars, you can, and it is very evident that the Coke bottle styling was very much dropped from most of the lineup at Chrysler. Really, the only vehicles that kind of kept the Coke bottle styling going were the Plymouth Duster, the Charger, Challenger, until those vehicles were kind of pretty much killed off. Um, Outside of that, everything seems to coincide with also the fact that a gentleman named Lynn Townsend also stepped down and was replaced by John J. Ricardo. who was later replaced by Lee Iacocca in 1979, 1980, if I'm not mistaken. And mind you that uh, the K car that made Chrysler famous and brought them back, which had very boxy look, had a large cabin area, small little four-cylinder engines, some six cylinders, and stuff like that. Also used in the minivan, the Chrysler minivan and all that kind of stuff. That design was already being worked on by the time in 1977, 78 when Lee Iacocca came to Chrysler Corporation. All that stuff takes place during this very turbulent era for Chrysler. Um, but yeah, that is styling cues, stuff like the Dodge Magnum GT, if I'm not mistaken, and other vehicles like that, Plymouth Fury, stuff like that. The signs for the very squared look that Chrysler Corporation was beginning to implement and leading up to the K cars is very much present, um, very much there. It's across the lineup. Like I said, very few cars, all that kind of stuff really just took place. I really do apologize for not including that. It's not upon hearing the audio that I realized I missed a big gap there. So, sorry about that, folks. Anyways, back to the video. I'm not too sure. There may have been changes to the corporate structure that kind of, you know, came that about. But Tom Gale, as of 1985, was kind of the top person about direct styling, influence, working with designers and stuff like that. Um, he happened to last all the way until 2000, as far as I've read. Um, he lasted there till 2000. He retired in 2000, and uh, he had a hand in a lot of different vehicles. I mean, just due to the large amount of time that he was there for. So he likely got to see the approval of projects like, the Plymouth Prowler, some of the, more questionable ones, Plymouth Prowler, the push for the PT Cruiser. Um, he got to see the most famous one, the Dodge Viper. Um, and of course, the Mitsubishi slash Chrysler uh, Dodge Stealth, that whole thing. Yeah, a lot of those projects. Same thing with the Daytona Turbo Z or Daytona Turbo, the Shelby Dodge Charger. Uh, a lot of those things he likely had some hand in, and he likely either approved the project himself or he had it, approved by higher ups, folks higher than him, um, and all that. Uh, Outside of that, in 2000, like I said, he retires. A gentleman named Trevor Creed takes takes the position from 2000 to 2008. Um, he seemed to be in charge, so he also uh, seemed to have had a heavy hand in the PT Cruiser, in the Dodge SRT4, the LX platform with the introduction of the Chrysler 300, the Dodge Charger, and the soon-to-release Dodge Challenger at the time. Um, and he likely had a hand in all those different vehicles being launched. Um, oh, right, the another vehicle, Dodge Magnum, Dodge Nitro. Likely he once again likely had a hand in all that. After him, after his um, removal or retirement, I'm not quite sure. I didn't have the longest amount of time to really poke into that. Um, but after him came a gentleman named uh, Ralph Gillies. Ralph Gillies is actually, as far as I have uh, seen and as far as I've read, he's actually still in charge of that position. He's been in that position since 2008 to the present day. Um, the Dodge Hornet is probably something he had a hand in. Um, and he actually ran the SRT division at one point. He was also president of the Fiat Chrysler, if I'm not mistaken. It was after the merger of Chrysler and Fiat, so the Fiat Chrysler group. I believe he may have been president. If not, he may have just been president of Chrysler, um, or at least the Chrysler division. Um, and he, as far as I have it understood and as far as I have it known, he is still there today. He actually retired from the presidency, and he just remained in the styling department. And he, like I said, he's there to this day. So he's, kind of had a hand in a lot of the different things that Chrysler's had going on. The Dodge Dart, the Hellcats, the various the mass number of Chargers, Challengers, Demon, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure he's had a hand in all that. Um, but yeah, it was a lot just to find this, and even when I talk about in this, when I'm talking about in this video, all this is only a handful of all the things I managed to really dig up. There is so much to go through, and especially the whole 1980s, particularly the whole debacle of the Chrysler Corporation in 1980 with the government loan and everything like that. Oh my God, all that is so much information, so much to go through. I had to read that to one, know what was going on, two, to maybe dig out a name, maybe dig out, some kind of reference. That did not happen, but yes, a lot of stuff to go through there, and only to come out with nothing. Um, Kind of sad, but that's what it is. Um, an interesting thing that I did come across is the fact that um, during the 80s, the whole Lee Iacocca, stent, um, the K car was a very, very big thing. It started out slow, but it actually gave us one of the most uh, beloved vehicles. Perhaps not so much these days, just because SUVs and crossovers are everywhere. But for the 90s and the early 2000s, it was the minivan. The minivan actually came out of the K car. Um, I'm sure, it obviously with it changing, with it evolving and the chassis being redone and stuff like that, I'm sure, it didn't resemble its initial run, but yeah, the minivans came out from all that. Um, Very, very interesting information. Like I said, it's a lot. It started out fairly straightforward, but once again, once we get to 1973, I just get a name, and then the waters begin to muddle. It doesn't really become clear until around 1985. Um, Large hassle, um, but I managed to power through, and it took me quite a bit of time. I had some other things going on, in between. But wow, it is that was quite a bit. Um, so that is my design my design report on Chrysler designs and the individuals behind it, um, throughout the decades until the present day. Um, Thank you very much for listening. I can see that this has gone on for about half an hour. Uh, I apologize for taking so much of your time, but seriously, thank you all for listening. I hope to see everyone in the next video.